Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Mike Bell, the Executive Director of the Jenny Craig Institute for the Study of War and Democracy here at the National World War II Museum. And it's great to have all of you here in person. It's great to have all of you watching at home too, but we don't know how many of those there are right now, but certainly it's wonderful to see this crowd here. Today's a very special day here at the museum. It's the 78th anniversary of D-Day. It's also the museum's 22nd birthday. And so for those, some of us remember our 22nd birthday a long time ago, but happy birthday to us. And also the great occasion of D-Day doesn't hurt at all. So I'd really like to start. Yeah, we'll do that. Here we go. And I can't match the victory bell singing of happy birthday, so don't ask me to do that. I would like to start, though, to see if this evening, if we have any World War II veterans with us this evening, or home front workers, or Holocaust survivors in the audience. There's some finger pointing. No? If there are, please wave or indicate, but let's give them a round of applause if they're joining us at home. Next, I'd like to ask if there's any veterans of other eras or active duty military, if you'd please stand, wave, and be recognized by the group. And thank you for your service. And I have to ad-lib just a little bit. There's an old bumper sticker that says, Army wife, the toughest job in the Army. And for those that had veterans serving but had to keep the home fires burning or were responsible for supporting the service members, the family members, the spouses, how about if you stand and wave and we can give you a round of applause as well. Well, thanks for that. Now we've got a great evening ahead of us. We've had a great day. It's possible that, because of many people here, and so let me just kind of recognize some of those. First I'd like to recognize the museum's Patriot Circle and Charter members. If you're here, would you please stand so we can recognize you as well? And then for our partners at the Churchill Society, I know you've come in force. Would you mind standing as well, please? We'll recognize you. Notice it's like a little phalanx here. It's with a few outliers, of course. We also have with us our museum's President Stephen Watson, President and CEO, and Dr. Nick Mueller, who's the founding President and CEO. Nick, thanks for your service. Stephen, there's Stephen. And then I'd like to make a special point of recognition for Miss Ann Abbott, whose husband Herschel was a guiding light both for the museum and for the Churchill Society of New Orleans. Good to see you. And then lastly, but certainly not least, I'd like to acknowledge Shirley Corey, whose husband was the champion of both of these organizations and who tonight's program is named after. Now, Shirley, I'm new to the museum, just got here in the fall and didn't have the pleasure of meeting Orlin, but I understand he's a great and fun man, and I hope to play some part in keeping his legacy alive, so thank you very much. Now, it's my pleasure to pass the podium to a friend of the museum's who's been involved with many of our Churchill-related programming over a decade. Hopefully we can say this, many decades as we move forward, right? And this is the president of the Churchill Society of New Orleans, Greg Collins. So, Greg, the stage is yours.
Many decades, I hope. Well, I'm Greg Collins. I'm the Prime Minister of the Churchill Society of New Orleans. As I say sometimes, Legally, it's president, but that would be no fun. I'm the prime minister and, of course, our board of directors of the cabinet. And many of them are here tonight, if not all. I want to say a few words about Orlin Russell Corey. He was a man of arts, a member of the greatest generation serving in the Navy in World War II, a frequent performer at this magnificent museum, and a member of the cabinet of the Churchill Society of New Orleans. He continues to inspire us to learn about the history of both World War II and Winston Churchill by this lecture series, which is named in his honor. Shirley Corey, his wife, has been recognized, but all of this is made possible by an anonymous donor in terms of the Corey Lecture. Tonight, the Churchill Society of New Orleans is very proud to partner with the World War II Museum to bring you this tremendous look into the Churchill family during World War II. This is particularly poignant, of course, on June 6th, D-Day, which for some reason struck me to look up. It was a Tuesday in 1944, albeit a Monday today. In many ways, right now, the people of Ukraine are enduring many D-Days with a leader who has recently been declared by many as very Churchillian. The Honorable Emma Soames, Winston Churchill's granddaughter, brings us the personal insight into her mother, Mary Soames' diaries that only a daughter might. Eric Larson called her the guardian of the diaries. Several quotes will provide you with perspectives and feelings of a 17-year-old young woman about to face her greatest trials. In 1939, Mary wrote, Saturday, 18 March. The crisis seems to be becoming more serious. Papa said, before God Almighty, I swear I do not wish for war. She said, I write this as a witness. This certainly makes the claims that Churchill was a warmonger ring hollow. Friday, 24 March, 1939. Things look very, very grave. Yet people do not seem to be so worried as at the last crisis. This is a 17-year-old Churchillian prescience by Mary as early as March 1939, before many in the British government saw what was approaching. September 3, declaration of war. At 10 a.m. came news of our ultimatum to Germany expiring at 11 a.m. 11:15 a.m., announcement by the Prime Minister that a state of war exists between Great Britain and Germany. Mary writes, "Oh God, I thought, I hoped, I prayed that our generation would never see a war and that those who fought the last time would never have to face this ordeal a second time." And lastly, to show you the complete nature of this book and his 17-year-old diaries, the humor and the humility of it, I'm going to quote something I quoted earlier at an earlier reception tonight, which is a notation dated September 25th of 1939. Packed hectically and left in a loaded car for London. Mummy's driving is really too extraordinary for words. We crossed some red lights once and nearly got sandwiched between two trams. To add to all of this, she would look for street names. I was in terror. Who among us have not had that experience? So these diaries will intrigue you, will make you emotional, and provide you with much new information as seen through the eyes of one great witness, Emma's mother, Mary Soames. Mike, I leave it to you to bring Ms. Soames and Steph to the entry to make the presentation. Thank you all.
Well, thanks, Greg. As you said that, it's a little flashback. In our Arizona State University course on diplomacy and leadership in World War II, the last 2 weeks, we've been dealing with that period, 1939, and literally the last 10 days that lead right up to the war. So this is an incredible opportunity tonight. Tonight we'll be graced on stage with two remarkable women, The Honorable Emma Soames, editor, is a broadcaster and columnist. She's been the editor of Literary Review, Tatler, the Daily Telegraph magazine. She's the second child of Mary and Christopher Soames, and she is her mother's literary executor, and she is the granddaughter of Winston and Clementine Churchill. You probably gathered that by now, right? It's pretty incredible. And then interviewing Emma will be our senior historian at the Jenny Craig Institute, Dr. Steph Hinnershitz. Steph received her PhD in American history from the University of Maryland. She's previously taught at West Point. She's the author of 3 books, including the award-winning Japanese-American Incarceration, the Camps and Coerced Labor in World War II. Steph's a great asset to the Institute, the museum, and I know this will be a wonderful conversation. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Emma and Steph to discuss Mary Churchill's War to the stage.
Sorry, my preparation is like my packing.
All right, so thank you everyone for coming out tonight, and thank you for all of the members of the Society for being here. I'm very excited to be sitting up here with Emma and to be learning a little bit more about the book. So we had the opportunity earlier today during our D-Day commemoration to hear about your mother's experiences with D-Day. But now we're going to be able to talk a little bit more broadly about Mary Churchill's war, but also what I'm most excited about, to talk more about Mary. So we have an opportunity to really get into this book. I'm not going to give away everything so that you remember to go buy it and to read it. And I will say, before asking Emma some questions, when I started to read the book, I wasn't sure how relatable Mary was going to be to me. But if you buy the book, which you should, and you read it, you'll quickly understand that this is a great insight into someone spectacular, but also, especially reading the diary of a teenage girl, there's so much that resonates. And it's a way to take this character that seems very lofty, but make her very real. So I am very excited to get more into some of the passages, which we'll be able to hear from Emma. But the first thing I want to ask is something that we usually ask a lot of authors, and that is very simply, what made you want to edit your mother's diary entries and publish them?
Well, she was a great personality, my mother, and she was very, very charming. And when I looked at the diaries, which I have to say, in my mother's lifetime, she never discussed, so I was barely aware of them. But after her death, her papers were left to Churchill College, Cambridge, to the Archive Centre, along with her mother and her father's papers and her siblings. And I went up there not knowing that lockdown was about to start, and had a look at the diaries. And despite the fact that she had used a few entries in her memoir, A Daughter's Tale, I thought there was masses more going on in the diaries, and they were really worth publication. My mother had rather an ambivalent view about the diaries. She described them as hot making, which is what she used to say when she was embarrassing. But I'm one generation away, and I thought they were completely charming. And I got one of my many siblings to come with me, to second guess me, and they agreed that, that they could see the light of day. And it's really been a remarkable journey for me. I mean, not half as remarkable as it was for my mother living through the war, but it has been an extraordinary project that I've been very, very proud to be able to, and I hope I've done her proud.
I think you definitely have, and she is very charming. That definitely comes through. There are so many entries where you just kind of fall in love with her and you want to be her friend, and other times where she's a bit sassy, but that's okay. Yeah. She's a teenage girl. Just makes her, again, sort of more relatable. But I do think it's important, the point you make, that there's a difference between a memoir, something that your mother published and might have been very polished, versus what you have found in her diary entries. And so one thing that I know I'm always interested in, and I think many of us would be interested to hear more about, the process that you and your family and the archivist that you also worked with, how did you decide which entries you wanted to include in this book? What was sort of your process with that?
Well, first of all, I'll say that once I got the green light from my siblings, so to speak, to do the diaries, they then left me alone and left it up to me. The editing of them, I'm a magazine editor by profession, so I come equipped with a red pen wherever I go, whenever I'm reading anything, really. So I had to learn to use that rather delicately. I was very keen to let my mother speak on good days and bad days, and she did indeed have her bad days. And really, the decisions we made for what to leave out was where to end it, because it goes on to the end of 1946, and there's some really charming things, one of which I may read later. And it was dreadful leaving it out, but we couldn't do the entire war, and we thought that, as Greg was quoting from 1939, it's so powerful, 1939, when she was only 17, you know, and moving into number 10 Downing Street when you're a 17-year-old girl is quite a sort of thing, really. So anyway, so really I took out repetition, and I took out a lot from after she was demobbed.
Yeah, the other fun thing that is noted is that with editing, there were also a lot of exclamation points that were also removed, because she is a teenage girl, so there were lots and lots of exclamation points, it seems like.
Well, as you see, I left a lot of those in.
Yes, there are still a lot.
Yeah. But when I say repetition, I mean it was things she did have. Dark nights of the soul. She got quite depressed at moments, and that got a bit repetitious. You know, there was a lot of sort of teenage self-flagellation going on, and you know, as we say, funny once. You know, so I took some of that out, but mostly it was where to end the book. But I did something very, very cunning, which nobody seemed to notice. That it stopped in 1945, but I wrote an epilogue.
Yes, very smart.
Yeah.
Very clever.
Yeah.
So in going off of that other question about your decision on what entries to include and what not to include, are there any entries that didn't make it into the book that you really liked or would have liked to have seen in the book?
Yes, I mean, in fact, it's in the epilogue, but in 1946, my mother went with her father, and many countries in Europe wanted to thank my grandfather for liberating them, and they seemed to regard him as personally responsible for that, which was unfair and wildly inaccurate, having, particularly with this wonderful, the Allied forces. We couldn't have done it without you. But so he went to Holland and Belgium and Switzerland, and my mother went along with him. And it's sort of amazing descriptions of how they were greeted. And in Holland, there was one place, they were given a luncheon, and I think it was called the House of Trèves or something, and it was literally a 16th century, you know, place where trades would you know, please themselves and do all the decoration. So they did this lunch for him, and they got out their best china, which was literally a museum exhibit, which was so valuable that the curators had to wash it all up by hand afterwards.
Wow. So that's actually a good bridge to my next question, which is about, there are plenty of times where you've referenced that there are moments where Mary goes with her father on very important trips and is sort of his earpiece in a lot of ways for a lot of the sort of higher policy things that he is doing, but she doesn't talk about that in her diary or doesn't go into much detail. So what if a historian, picks up this book and wants to learn about Mary or her father? What could a historian learn about Churchill, his policies, other things that we might not be able to get from elsewhere, even if she can't go into many of the specifics?
Well, it's not that she can't, but basically, her relationship with her father was increasingly close, but what he liked with his family relationships, and I would say particularly with my mother, is he could let off steam and he was off duty and he didn't have to talk as if he was talking to General Montgomery or FDR or, so they'd talk about, I don't know what really, but basically she was there to love him and support him. And if he wanted to talk, they would talk, and if he didn't, she would just listen, actually. Little entry here. We are in 1945. 13th of January, I lunched alone with Papa, a rare and precious occasion for me. He sat up in bed, resplendent in his bed jacket. I sat near his bed and we had a delicious lunch. Crab, beef, mince pies with Liebfrau milk to drink. At first, Papa read the Manchester Guardian and the Yorkshire Post, but then he talked to me, Greece, Monty, the battle, the House of Commons. He was so kind, and I did so love being alone with him, only I'm always afraid of boring him, so I was careful not to stay too long and went away at 2:30, that hour having flown. So that's the quality of their relationship. It's quiet, it's intimate. And there were others of my mother's siblings who would go into him and say, I want to talk to you about the social security situation in the East End of London. He didn't want that from his family, Mm-hmm. And I think my mother cottoned on to that quite naturally.
Yeah, there are plenty of parts throughout her diaries where she has these moments where she is able to be very close to it's just her and her father, and they're having these talks. And she brings up a couple of times that something that she's very afraid of is she doesn't want to appear to be boring. She doesn't want to bore him. When he's this very important figure, it's almost like she wants to make sure that his time with her is a little bit lighter, more peaceful in a way.
Yes, and she's protective of him, and she sees in him a vulnerability that other people didn't see. And his health was not great, towards the end of the war. He had pneumonia a couple of times. And, flying around the world in those aeroplanes with no, what's the word, they're not enclosed properly. So you had to wear a flying suit. And he went to Tehran, he went to Marrakesh, and he'd come home, more and more, he would come home with pneumonia. Mm-hmm. So what he wanted was a charming daughter sitting on the end of his bed, not talking about things, but talking about the state of her pug or something.
Yeah, she really did want to make him proud in so many different ways. So in that way, reading this diary, it really is, again, even though she's a very extraordinary person, but understanding that relationship between a father and a daughter, it's very relatable. It's something that certainly kind of comes out to me about that.
But she accompanied him, as you've mentioned. She was with him as his ADC, when he came first of all to the Quebec conference in 1943, and then on down to Washington. So it's a very good line my mother had. Somebody would say, when did you first go to America? Oh, in 1943, and we stayed at the White House. It was absolutely true. She wasn't showing off. She was just saying how it was, But she sat next to FDR about 4 nights in a row at dinner. And she did say, oh my God, I should be writing, this should not just be my day, my diary. So she did quite a canny analysis of the character of FDR. which is interesting. And she loved sitting next to FDR, and he obviously rather enjoyed sitting next to her, since he went on doing it several nights in a row. But there she was, great affairs of state being discussed, and she did not diarize them, if indeed she was included in the discussion. And actually, I think that is because once, in I think 1940, she left her diary on a train. And I mean, I should think the blood drained from her face when she did that. So I don't think she had that sort of relationship with her father, but she wasn't going to put on paper anything that could possibly be left, that could only be left on a train.
Yes, I remember that when she left her diary. I was like, we gotta go get that diary. It was very nerve-wracking to me reading some of the other things that she had written. Not necessarily about high-ranking people, but more just teenage girl stuff.
Yeah.
I would not want someone
exactly.
to find that diary
Even
either.
your mother, you wouldn't want to read it.
No. And then real quick, because it is very interesting, her description of FDR. She does spend a little bit of time talking about what she makes of him, which I did think that was really a different version of FDR that you get from reading this diary.
Yes. I haven't marked it up, but it should be easy to find, like most things, due to the fact that this book has a wonderful index, so you can dip in.
It is a wonderful index.
Having said that, of course, I now won't be able to find it. Opinion of, found it. Oh, yes. I still find the Prez magnetic and full of charm. His sweetness to me is something I shall always remember. But he is a raconteur, and it can be tedious. Oh, gosh, I shouldn't read this bit, sorry. I now understand the article out of Profiles comparing Wilkie and the president and saying the president is sophisticated. He certainly is an acute, cunning old bird, if ever there was one. Every evening, FDR makes extremely violent cocktails before dinner in his study. Fowler attends, and that's his dog, and it's all very agreeable and warm. At dinner, Mummy is on his right, and several nights, no other guest being there, I've been on his left. I'm devoted to him and admire him tremendously. He seems to have fearless courage and an art of selecting the warmest moment of the iron. Papa and he are an interesting contrast.
Yeah, it's great. And there are so many other people that we would be familiar with even before reading the diary, these like giants of history, and then you get a teenage girl's views of them, which is amazing.
The ill-judged engagement.
Yes, right. Yeah. So I mean, if for that alone, it's definitely worth a read.
Yeah.
There's some who are giving her relationship advice. It's really amazing.
she got engaged to this obviously fabulous-looking young man called Eric Duncannon, and in the immediate time she told her mother about this, her mother said, "Yes, that's marvellous, darling," and looked the other way. And it was only about a week later that Clementina said, "What?" And Averil Harriman happened to be staying at Chequers that weekend, and my grandmother said to him, will you go and sort it out? So Averil Harriman was seen walking around the lawn with Mary, saying, you shouldn't be doing this, and, you need to get engaged more than once, and, anyway. But by the time they got back, my mother was in floods of tears and promptly became unengaged. But I don't know how many teenagers we know had American diplomats talk them out of ill-judged liaison.
Yeah, it's really just seeing these people through her eyes is really amazing. And then we already talked a little bit about it, but just to hit the point a little bit more, what can we learn about Churchill from Mary that we might not be able to get, because there are so many as you all know, so many books about Churchill out there. So what is it about this that we can
Well,
get?
as Greg said before, that quote in 1939, when, she said, "I am witness," and Grandpapa said, "I do not want a war." So you get things that he said that I had never read before. There is moments when they go to in 1939, waiting for war to start, they go to the zoo and they meet the giant panda. And Grandpapa says something like, if there'd been more pandas, we need more cuddlability in the world. So you get sort of whispers of my grandfather's immense way with words, but he's off duty when he's with his family, so it's not like when he's in the House of Commons and he's honing his one-liners. So he is just being himself, really. So you see that side of him, but it is not. I mean, it must have been a great disappointment for you, Steph, as a historian, hoping to find the key to the Western Alliance strategy of 1942.
That wasn't in the index. I looked. It's not there.
I'm so sorry.
No, it really is. It helped me to understand more about a person as a person. So even though this is a figure who obviously is very important, significantly important for history, but also to know that it is still a person. This is someone who has a family. This is someone who has a home life. And maybe sometimes it's easy to separate those two, but in Mary's diary, it's her father.
Yes, but she also realized, she's not a fool, my mother, and she realizes how important my grandfather is. And she goes, 1939 onwards, she goes a lot to the House of Commons and listens to him take part in debates. And it is, funnily enough, there that she wakes up to what, she says, "I feel I haven't loved him enough or revered him enough." And that is she's getting from seeing him perform in the House of Commons, where he is undoubtedly, he takes the place by storm, So she's fully aware that he is a very great man. She's also fully aware that he's a very great man with a huge amount of responsibility on his shoulders. And what she can bring to the party is, one, never letting him down, which she says several times, that is her main ambition in life, and it remained her ambition while I knew her. She just wanted to do my grandfather proud, really. That was the main driving focus of her life, really. So she realized she realized that what she could bring to the party was love, protection, charm, and making his life more agreeable, really, in very, very dark times.
Yeah, that sounds like it's a lot of pressure, right? For like this young girl who's trying to do all this and be this sort of light for her father. It sounds like it's a very difficult thing to do for her. In some cases, she's juggling a lot.
She is, but she's utterly dedicated to what she perceives to be her duty. And I think she got that right, that certainly when she was that young, that was all she could do. But then, of course, she flaps her wings a little bit, and she becomes a fledgling person in her own right. And then she's dying to do something more for the war than just be a librarian for the Women's Voluntary Service in the local hospital, which is what her first role was.
Yeah, and then we see a pretty important turning point in her life, and especially during this diary, she joins the ATS. And so before going into some questions about her and her time in that, I think for many of the people watching at home and our audience here, we're perhaps more familiar with WACS. So if you could tell us a little bit what the ATS was, that might be helpful.
Yes, I mean, I think it's probably as close to an equivalent as in British terms as to the WWII. But I don't know enough about either to say it's an exact, but what it was the Auxiliary Territorial Service. It was entirely women. And then at the beginning of the war, well, not even the beginning of the war, actually, the era of 1941, it was professionalized and they started paying girls, hopefully the same rate as men, but I somehow doubt it. That would be a first. My mother was the man who ran all the home defense for the UK, for my grandfather, was called General Pyle. And he came to visit my grandfather at Chartwell one day, and he wanted his permission to have mixed, i.e. mixed gender batteries, so they could liberate more men to go off and do sort of grown-up fighting. And my mother pricked up her ears, and she and her best friend, Judy, who was also staying, they conceived this idea. They wanted to join the ATS and go specifically so they could go and work in these mixed batteries, which was real soldiering. And so that's what they did. And she had a very respectable war, my mother. I mean, she started off as a private. And there's a charming story at the beginning of the war. She very much wanted not to be known as Miss Churchill. And she even asked her mother not to write to her on number 10 Downing Street envelopes that had number 10 on the back. So she wanted to be Private Churchill. Anyway, she hardly got into this strategy of being just Mary and one of the girls when the powers that be in Whitehall decide they want to use her as a poster girl for recruitment to the ATS and specifically to these mixed batteries. And so my poor mother, she was desperately unhappy about it. She had spent an entire day being photographed. I have to say that the photographer was Cecil Beaton. But Cecil Beaton in uniform, he was doing his bit too. But, you know, and I think I was, as a magazine editor, I thought, my God, she was photographed by Cecil Beaton. You know. And so her cover was well and truly comprehensively blown. But the girls that she was training with were all very nice about it. And also, of course, they increasingly adored her father. So everybody was fine about it, except my mother, who desperately wanted to not be Miss Churchill, you know.
Yeah. She certainly made that was a goal. She tried so hard to not, it really is it's almost heartbreaking. She tried really hard to just be kind of, quote, normal. She didn't, why did she do, like, what drove her to do this?
To want to be normal?
Yes, or normal, and to be in the ATS.
Well, she wanted to do her duty. I mean, and there is pages of it in the diary, actually, of sort of saying, well, I know I'm a help to my parents and maybe I should be staying here, but I desperately want to, you know, somebody else can be doing the library in Stoke Mandeville Hospital. But I'm young and I could go and help the war effort in a more, you know, frontline way. So she was very torn about it, but her parents very much supported her decision to join up. And indeed, it did a lot in the course of the war to make her closer to her father, who was incredibly proud of her. And when she was in a battery in Hyde Park, he was always saying to, like, Harry Hopkins, who'd come over to see him, come on, we'll go and watch Mary fire her guns.
Yeah, and Harry Hopkins makes an appearance too throughout here, so that's also really,
Yes,
really
and
neat.
and I suspect that it was a moment when there wasn't a lot of action in Hyde Park, and I think they got more visitors from number 10 Downing Street than they did from Adolf Hitler.
So what kind of impact did Mary's service have on her throughout the war or even after the war? Because this certainly seems like a really, really important turning point for her.
You're so right. The thing is, she had lived a very sheltered life. She was brought up at Chartwell. She was known as the Chartwell child. Her siblings, there was a big age gap between her and her next sister up, who was Sarah, who was 8 years older than her. And so she was brought up like being an only child at Chartwell. She went to school, but it was a little local day school, that's fine. She did very well. She had lots of pets. She rode. But I don't think she ever spent a night away, and certainly not away from her parents until she joined the army. So it was a massive growing up experience for her. And also, you know, she met people of all different classes, all different ranks. Everybody mucked in. It was an amazing experience, and she loved it. And they loved her, like most people ended up eating out of her hand. She was so, you know, charming, but she was humble with it, and this desire to be an ordinary person. She so didn't want to come over, or, well, I'm, you know, the Prime Minister's daughter, and let me go first. She was absolutely the opposite of that. Even if people were saying, no, you go first, she would not do that. And she saw the army as her opportunity to do something in her own right. And she was successful in that. And she ended up as a captain with a platoon, if that's the right word, of 223 girls. She was awarded a military MBE, and she ended up in Berlin, not as part of D-Day, but as the sort of part of the follow-up operation.
Yeah, it is really amazing when you start off reading these diaries to see where she ends up and all that she is able to accomplish, and sort of watch her grow. You kind of grow along with her. So it is a really amazing
Yeah, because
story.
she's a baby at the beginning, and she's a very sophisticated young woman by the end of it.
Yeah.
But she had great insecurities, my mother, and she was always comparing herself to other. I wonder if I can find it. Oh, I think I took the mark out. My brother sees me doing a talk with a book full of a forest of stickers coming out. He said, "Oh, you can't do that." So I go, before this evening, I was taking out all these stickers, and now, of course, I desperately want one. Hold on, let me think. Oh, I don't think I get to find it. Sorry, I'll forget that. Ask me another.
Oh, well,
Sorry.
I'm actually going to get ready to open it up to the audience for any questions, but I will very strongly recommend the book. It is really great. You'll learn that you will love Mary. And yeah, so I'll turn it over to my colleague Jeremy for questions.
Before we get started with questions, Dr. Steph Hinnershitz and Emma Soames. Thank you very much, ladies. If you have a question, please raise your hand and I will try to spread the wealth. We'll start here to your far left, ladies.
What was your relationship like with your grandfather?
Well, it was absolutely delightful. One of my very first memories is of the smell of cigars and the feel of velvet. Because when we were babies, we were put on his lap. He loved babies, my grandfather. And so I remember you know, his clothes were imbued with cigar smoke, and they were this lovely soft velvet, you know, these sort of romper suits he used to, siren suits he used to wear. And then, but I did not have conversations with him about the future of the world after World War II, I have to say.
If you raise your hand, I'll do my best to get to as many of you as possible. Right in the front center, please.
After the Second World War, when Churchill was not reelected, what was your mother's take on all that?
I think she cried for 48 hours. She was incredibly upset. She was with her father, she was with her parents at number 10 Downing Street when the results started coming in. And she had been at Potsdam, the Potsdam conference, with her father as his ADC, and they left Potsdam to come back to London for the results, and then they thought they'd go back to Potsdam. Well, that never happened. She was incredibly upset, but then what happened, she went back to her platoon in Europe, and her mother wrote to her saying, "We really need you, can you come home?" Because I think he became very unhappy, my grandfather, and didn't know what to do with himself. And my mother was very good with him, and so she got demobbed, came home, and spent the next year living at home with her parents.
Oh, wait for the microphone, please. Wait for the microphone, please.
Then I get so excited. Then when he was reelected, what did she say?
What did she say?
Your mother.
Do you know, I don't know what she said, but I mean, it happened. My father went to work for him. My mother had married by then. And I imagine she was thrilled. If that's what my grandfather wanted, then she would have been delighted. But, you know, there were more and more concerns about his health and whether he could go the distance. But I never really discussed, I was 3, so I don't know really. But thank you.
In the front row to your left.
Ms. Soames, thank you so much. I have a personal thank you and a question. My thank you is, I thank you for touching with your fingertip my Blenheim bow tie, and thereby blessing it with living history. My question is, and I'm not widely traveled, I read a lot, and I may be wrong, but my perception is that your grandfather is more widely revered on this side of the Atlantic than on the other side. And my question is, do you think that's correct? And if you do you have an explanation for that?
Well, I can't say whether it's correct. I think, yes, I think you're right. But whether it is correct, I wouldn't like to say. No, I mean, I find it so thrilling to come here and find a thriving Churchill Society, a flatteringly full room to listen to my meager contribution to history. And it is not the same volume of sort of enthusiasm in the UK, but it may be because people sort of take for granted what you've got in your own front garden, so to speak. I think that is really what I mean, I don't want to draw a comparison between my grandfather and the Queen, but a lot of people in England were talking about, oh, we don't need the monarchy anymore. There was a lot of that about 5 years ago. And it's only really in the last couple of years that people have a lot of people have woken up to how amazing she is, what she has given to the country, the duty, her sense of duty. And all of these things would have been unfashionable words 5 years ago. So, you know, I think my grandfather, he's not going to go away. And it's just a different, it's a picture painted in slightly different colors, that's all.
To your right in the center, please.
Hello and welcome. I'm Dorothy Klein. I'm a member of the Patriot Circle here, and I'm a big fan. I've read your grandmother's biography. I'm reading right now Eric Larson, The Splendid and the Evil, I think it is, and so I look forward to reading your book. But one of the things I wanted to ask you is tell us about your childhood and where you fit in and your siblings.
Well, I was born at Chartwell because when my parents first married, the farmhouse at Chartwell came up for sale. My grandparents bought it, and my parents lived there. So it was marvelous for my mother because she could go on seeing her parents every day, and at the same time she was starting her own family. So I was born at Chartwell Farm, and in those days you didn't go to hospital to have babies, you had them at home. So I was born at Chartwell Farm. And then I remember walking up through the garden at Chartwell nearly every day to go and have tea with my grandparents. So I had a very close relationship with them. I mean, they were a big thing in our lives as a family.
Your left in the center aisle, please.
Your country, the English, have always had a very pointed view, an interesting view, appropriate view of history. So first, I want to thank you for visiting the colonies. My question focuses on what occurred some 50 years before you came into the world, where your grandfather met an American leader, about to be an American leader, Theodore Roosevelt, shortly after your grandfather launched his political career by escaping from a prison that the Boers had put him in during the Boer War of 1898. Theodore Roosevelt was some 15 years older than your grandfather. He was about 40, having just attained the governorship of New York State. And your grandfather, of course, had just launched his political career with that dramatic escape. What was the relationship between the two of them? They were at different times in their lives, but did they influence one another? Can you address that? We're going way back.
I'm afraid, to be honest, I can't. I mean, Steph might be able to help me out here.
I cannot.
I need due warning of that question, actually.
So I saw another question over here to the back, to your left, ladies.
So General Montgomery was a pretty interesting character. I'm wondering in her writings if she ever mentions what she thinks of Monty or his character?
No, she doesn't really say what she thinks of him, but he's very much around in the late days of the war, so she mentions him quite a lot. I think and certainly she was very fond of Monty, and he was actually godfather to my younger brother Jeremy, who's called Jeremy Bernard. But she never said anything judgmental about him at all. I think just everybody thought he was rather eccentric and was very fond of him. And he had a good war, it has to be said. Minor detail.
To your right, please.
What do you and your family think of Manchester's two books on Churchill?
a lot.
And one other quick question.
Sorry.
And do you have any insight on the dealings between Churchill and the artist that the government sent to paint him?
The artist of what, sorry?
The artist who painted the portrait that he had not presented, destroyed.
The Graham Sutherland, you mean? Okay, so I know that my mother thought a lot of the William Manchester books, and my mother in later life became a sort of matriarch to the whole family. Everybody referred to her. My cousin Randolph referred to her, and people didn't do much without running it past Mary. And she read everything that was sent to her. Publishers sent her books in proof and everything. But anyway, Manchester met with her approval. And I've got several Manchester volumes which came from my mother's library. Graham Sutherland, my grandmother and my mother saw how much it upset my grandfather. And at that point in his life, they just wanted to do everything not to upset my grandfather. Hence the fate of the picture, which it may be politically incorrect to go putting your foot through canvases, but that's what happened.
So the last question is actually one of Steph's that she didn't get to, I believe. Apart from Mary, who in your mother's diaries is your favorite character who appears or does not appear in the printed version?
Well, gosh, there are lots. I mean, one, my mother's best friend, Judy Montague, was a terrific character, and you see a lot of her in the book, and she was a great support to my mother. And they were like partners in crime, and they joined up on the same day, so they went through training together. But I'm very keen on Noel Coward, who I wish, if my mother were around today, I would ask her if my instinct is right, that he could just rock up to number 10 Downing Street whenever he felt like it. She'd just say, Noel Coward dropped in. And the last time he dropped in was, hold on. Sorry. Where are you, Noel? Go. So this is a sort of typical entry by my mother. Hot and heavenly, wore white dress, no stockings, save à la peinture. You know, when people used to paint the seam up the back. Feeling relaxed and happy. Drinks at the mess. Noel Coward arrived for lunch, very charming. Papa a little tedious about basic English. I felt rebellious, rebelled, rebellion quelled. After dinner, Noel sang again his new song, Don't Let's Be Beastly to the Germans. And then many more old ones, lovely. So there's lots of Noel Coward turning up and singing, running his new songs past Churchill for his approval.
And a lovely conclusion to a lovely conversation. Thank you, ladies.
So thank you both for shedding light on Mary, and who really provided a great eyewitness account to her diaries, you know, and some invaluable historical sources, and reminds us really how important it is not to lose sight of the individual people that really are the stuff of history as we go forward. And of course, I can relate. My own daughter Mary is serving in uniform now, and I hate to see what her diary looks like. So Emma will be here with us signing copies of her book. It looks like a pretty amazing page turner, and we look forward to reading that. Please also mark your calendars for next Tuesday, June 14th, which will be our next author event on the new book called Old Breed General, How Marine Corps General William H. Robertus Broke the Back of the Japanese in World War II from Guadalcanal to Peleliu. Now, the granddaughter of General Robertus, we've got a theme here. Amy Robertus Peacock and her co-author Don Brown will be here for that. So a great opportunity. He was the commander of the 1st Marine Division for 3 years in the Pacific. So a pretty incredible opportunity to listen to that story. The event will be across the road over at the Higgins Hotel on the 2nd floor in the Arcadia Ballroom. So we hope to see you there. More importantly, we were glad to see you here. And we hope you enjoyed this evening. A special thanks to Steph, to our partners at the Churchill Society. Greg, many more decades. To Shirley Corey, thanks Shirley for doing this. And of course to Emma Soames. And with that, thank you everybody, good night, and let's give Emma a last round of applause. Thanks everyone.